Welcome to One Word Stories, episode 5. Today, I'm really thrilled to host a very special guest, Ilyll Sné-Or, who is based in Israel, in Tel Aviv. However, currently has moved to a smaller place, smaller town, and there is a good reason for it. Ilyll, thank you for joining us and thank you for saying yes to the conversation.
Mhm. My pleasure, Joanna, and I'm also glad to be part of your conversations of the one-word stories. Yes.
Ilyll, actually, there are so many words and so many questions that come to my head when I see you. Um, you are a very talented young artist. You are a
Thank you.
very skillful story worker, so to say. So a person who works with storytelling, story listening. You are also a cultural mentor. And all this makes such a huge, beautiful mosaic of just professional identities. What about other aspects of your identity as
Hmm.
Ilyll?
Well, that's a great question. I think that especially as a cross-culturalist and the fact that I have lived across different continents and I work today in 5 languages, and I always feel like I have multiple cultural desktops like open on my mind. I think identity is a tough and an important question. Obviously, also being a professional and touching, just like you said, these fields of interculturalism, cross-culturalism, storytelling, mediation, consultancy, innovation, because I think that today, and this is a spoiler for maybe for the rest of our talk, how creative one ought to be, I think, in any field. It's not the luxury of just one field, of any field today, to say no creativity or innovation or doing things in a different way is not part of our agenda. On the contrary, so I think that identity wise, I have all of those colors within, and I think that I'm always hungry also to discover and to add eclectically more parts that I feel part of.
Think of this metaphor of a cultural mosaic and also the place where you are based, I immediately recall the beautiful mosaics in Jerusalem.
Mm,
And many times there is one dominant color. So there are more, very vivid colors, blue, red, yellow, gray, all the nuances. Many times there is gold as a background.
mm,
However, this gold wouldn't be really so bright if there weren't tiny pieces of black stones in between so that it can really shine. And it drives me to the question, what are the moments when you say, oh, okay, these are these parts of identity that are not so present to the outside world, nevertheless extremely important to me.
hmm. Well, I think that the past year brought some of maybe the balance in this mosaic, or the shift in the colors and the coloring, or the rays of light that hit these particles of glass or of stone, and suddenly a different perspective basically shines, or allows different colors to appear. And I think that this balance between what you are used to, maybe shining and excelling or doing, sometimes is required to kind of change a little bit. So professionally for me, the last year has been quite challenging. And I think that that really tipped also that the scale over that question: when is it time for change? When do you kind of notice a certain part maybe of your professional work, of your personal life, of some global climate that is changing, that requires an action, right? Taking action, and maybe practicing, in my case, also what you preach, not only to train about VUCA times, about these volatile and complex and ambiguous and uncertain days, but actually to prepare yourself for that, to accept change as a daily fact, and not only to think of it as some concept that how do I change one time, but no, to actually live that. and also to grow from it. Focus on maybe your dreams, your goals, things that you would have liked to achieve, and just like you said, maybe sharing within yourself, or kind of conversing within yourself with new parts of your personality that were usually timid and shy and kind of stayed on the side, and suddenly you allow them to be part of the discourse.
So what I hear is the word change in every second sentence. So how did it actually support you, 2020, in the
Mm.
transformational processes?
I think that 2020, in a sense, what didn't leave any much choice. It was like a one-way path that you can't go over it. I remember a children's story to my young sister many years ago, where it said, you can't go over it, you can't go under it, you have to go through it. And in that sense, I feel that 2020 was really one of those challenges that you just have to go through it. And in my case, what it meant is that basically most of, or almost all, what I had planned between January to March of 2020 was canceled within 2.5 weeks. And it felt like, after working more than a decade on a business, on doing things in a certain way, something just comes and changes everything so drastically and so quickly.
I'm just asking myself what a story of the positive change did you experience in this tough year? Were there any moments when you said, oh, wow, this is not only challenging, this is also the moment of growth?
So, like always, I started my research across cultures. I always have this faith in being able to anchor my personal steps within different cultural attitudes to different concepts. So that's where I discovered, for instance, in Chinese, that the word crisis is composed of two pictograms, one that means opportunity and the other means danger. And after focusing on the danger, or maybe the loss and the change in a negative sense, I decided to try and harness as much as I could of my energies and will and creativity, and to try and really look for the opportunities. A different part was that I discovered a song by Mercedes Sosa, which
Mhm.
I love. Sometimes I really listened a lot to her music over the last year, because it felt that there's some wisdom, some deep wisdom in the way also that she performs songs, also if they're not written by her. And also, obviously, the songs that were written by her. And she has one song talking about change, that she says, things change all the time. It's part of life, so it's only natural that I too will change.
Yeah.
And I think that really gave me some stability, maybe in this wobbly trip. There's also a Dutch yoga teacher that started just offering like 15 to 20-minute sessions on resilience. So when all the pools were closed and no biking and nothing, all the lockdown just, made me need to be at home. So that was another way, that was an outlet for like physical activity, but also it brought some peace, I think, to the mind,
Hmm.
on a resilience, and maybe trying to connect to some larger change that's going on.
I'm really
Um,
grateful for your comment regarding resilience, because this is also something that is very, very much connected not only to the present time, but also to the past. And as I can imagine, it's also not only at the personal level, but also in the broader context, building this resilience from stories that are sometimes painful, sometimes traumatic, sometimes stories that we are part of, however, would really love to re-narrate them. And this is also my question to you. What actually guided you to work with storytelling and story listening in your work as a cultural mediator?
so I think that that's part of the reasons that I ended up being a mediator and continuing from a very um, cross cultural BA into a master's in mediation, because I understood the power of perspective,
Mhm.
and to that every experience, never there's no one truth, right? Like truth is a very I'd even say almost like a liquid, right? That you can't hold in a cup, or um, we can share a certain experience, but then every person who will be present will remember it in his or her own unique way, and that is their truth, that is their experience, and you can't argue about that. But then I started noticing the value that you have in these different perspectives. And I remember, I think the day it dawned on me, you know, it's from these things that happen to you and it kind of becomes anchored in your mind forever, was during my BA, and I studied Middle Eastern studies, African studies, and French in the Tel Aviv University. So I studied in 4 languages, French literature in French, and then Arab literature of like Egyptian writers in Arabic, and also in English and Hebrew. And I remember one day during the introductory courses hearing about the Middle East, for instance, through the perspective of um, researchers from Middle Eastern studies, and then going to the next class 15 minutes later hearing about it from the African perspective, from researchers of Africa or North Africa. And then if France, which usually was involved either in the colonization or in some war or in writing some traveling book about it, which later became very famous as a novel or a play, etc., suddenly tells the same story from a different perspective. And I remember that one day traveling, you know, with my backpack and notebooks and feet from one building to another, from one class to another, hearing about the same event from 3 different perspectives. All are true, all are anchored with a lot of references in different, even, yeah, studies and articles, etc. And suddenly I said, wow, what do you do with history, right? What do you do with storytelling? Do you want to create from that some kind of experience, for instance, which is used a lot, I think, in the subconscious, um, also local, unfortunately, politics, and maybe that's also related to the way in which locally the COVID is being managed, to harness the fear as a very important element in that? Or do you want to use these different stories for creating something new, something more harmonious, something eclectic, that takes the beauty from these different perspectives and puts them together, just like you said at the beginning, into some mosaic, right,
Mhm.
that has a much larger value than only the pink colors or only the black colors or only the gray colors, but it's this kind of mesh weaving everything in together that creates this splendid wow. And that was very clear to me that I want to find a way to actually bridge these gaps, um, not manage conflicts, but give people tools for resolving conflicts.
Mhm.
So that was my way of actually looking at stories as something that is inherent in us as human beings, across all cultures, all periods of time, and actually it's amazing, just material that's lying around over there, and you just need to ask a person, right, how do you feel about, what do you remember from, what is your story, right? And usually you need to tell them, oh, you know, our time is out, let's go, because there's so much to talk about.
Yeah, yeah. What actually is happening right now, and this is also a very, very dominant narrative, is that the teenagers, also the kids, are called the so-called lost generation. And this is actually something that took place in the 20s, in the 19th century as well. So that the whole generation was called the lost generation. Nevertheless, by labeling people this way, we predict, we more or less co-create new spaces how we want to live, work, and learn together, and that they can shift from this really strong current narration of the lost generation.
So I think it reminds me something that once I used in one of the cross-cultural trainings for one of the groups over here locally in the Israeli police, where there were people, there were basically policemen and women from, originally, some of them were also born in these countries, from Ethiopia, um, from Russia, from Iraq, from Iran, from Morocco, from Poland, people that were also born here, and there were and it also changed their mother tongue, obviously. And I remember one of the Ethiopians that kind of mentioned their experience, and later I also found more evidence and some research written about it, that in Ethiopia, the Jews, again, going back into identity, right? What is identity composed of, and when do you need to, when are you requested to re-question who are you, right? So these communities of Ethiopians that were Jews, or that's how they perceived who they were always, or some of them, at least the ones that I've interviewed, felt a little bit of outsiders in Ethiopia, because they always had something slightly different than the majority, which were also Christians and also Muslims and also other um, kind of religious traditions over there. And that was always like a thing. And then they decided at a certain point, from again a mosaic of different reasons, to leave Ethiopia, and the majority also came to Israel. Again, I'm saying they came, but many people would already change the story and to say, and they would say they were brought here. Okay,
Yeah. Mhm.
which again is a, are you active in your story or are you passive? Okay, and I think that's the first step that I want to get to, which is the accountability, and that those same groups of people that actually felt that they're a little bit of outsiders because of their religion in Ethiopia came to Israel, where they said, okay, now obviously everyone else is going to be a Jew. And then they started experiencing a lot of racism because of their basically their color, their skin color, because up until then there wasn't that shade of skin color visible that much.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then basically becoming Black became an issue much more than being a Jew was. And sometimes also their Judaism was questioned. I don't want to get into it right now. But I think that that goes back to, how can you heal that? How can you change that? It's first of all your accountability over your story. I like also the English word responsibility, because if you break it down, it always has the ability to respond, right? You're
Yeah.
responsible, so you have that ability. And I think that it starts out on a very personal level. I think that it's terribly frightening many times, to kind of dive deep into and to really figure out, who are you, what are your kind of cultural components, what is your cultural profile, what is your identity. I think many times people need the help of other people, of other therapists, of coaches, of friends, of a community. I don't think that it's something that in humanity right now we can just each do on our own. I think that it's also to recognize the power of maybe being vulnerable, the beauty in it, and that through that you can, through the help of somebody else, you can change. And that it's also important not only for yourself, but it's like these ripples. um, it's important also for the surrounding, for your dear ones, for your colleagues, for your community, your nation, and that just expands. And I think that the first step, if I'm going back to your question of how can you first of all, create a certain belonging within a narrative, within a certain time, within a generation, is to find your place, is to find your own story. How do you relate to what happened then? How do you tell that? What does it mean to you? What
Yeah.
would you like to pass on? Um, and through this accountability, I think you can create some kind of gap or some distance between what is sometimes even thrown on you, or expected that you just inherit or that you just take, whether you like it or not, into maybe a process of like sorting out and saying, okay, these components I agree with. This is something that really is part of who I am, of my experience, of my personal history. And with these parts, just like old furniture, or like hand down clothes, you just pack and go and put in the recycling.
Then I'm really curious to hear from you, what would be your suggestion for someone who maybe hasn't done it so far? How can a person start working with stories of belonging so that she also gets to know themselves better way, and also are more conscious about their own stories?
So a great tool that I used many years. It requires also having a notebook that you like, and I'm
Mhm.
emphasizing like the low tech writing down, not like typing type of thing, but actually having a notebook and a pen or a pencil, and a little corner in the space that you have, which is quiet, that no one will interfere or disrupt for 7 minutes. And to basically begin your day, whether you're an early bird at 5 a.m. or a late kind of morning person, to start with 7 minutes of just automatic writing. That's how the avant-garde French people who used it, I think at the beginning of the 20th century, did in France, and not only, also in the United States and in many other places, to just write without thinking, to set a timer for 7 minutes. And the only rule is that you're not allowed to lift the pen from the paper, and you're not allowed to stop. And another good exercise, which also comes from the same kind of region of subconscious, it's almost like a mental brushing teeth exercise, are just also timing for like 5 or 10 minutes yourself, and writing only sentences that start with I am.
Mhm.
I am now writing and I don't know what to write about. I am now drinking my coffee. I am now stressed. I am now wondering what to do. I am. Every sentence starts with I am. And these two exercises also helped me tremendously in different periods of time. Also, when I lived in Paris and I was dealing with a kind of a relocation that failed, I must say, which also took some time until I could grow out of it and actually flourish with the different things that I did there. But that really helped me. And it's something very simple. It requires only a pen, paper, 7 minutes of your time a day. But what is the most important component is the consistency.
Yeah, yeah,
Because I think that external change can happen very quickly, but I think that internal change requires attention and tenderness
mm,
and time.
definitely.
So yeah, so I think that's a good way to start. And then there's a lot of material and food for thought that can be discovered through
Yeah,
this exercise.
yeah, wonderful, wonderful. And I'm just thinking of one more, dynamic, so to say, that this issue of identity is very, very present in many, many corners of the world. Nevertheless, when I recall, visiting Israel, I was really kind of puzzled when people introduce themselves as a Polish Jew, German Jew, Russian Jew, and so on and so forth. So always with this cultural roots, so to say. And this is also something that guides me to the question, a personal question actually. How do you introduce yourself when you when you are asked about this cultural belonging? And also, as you yourself, you are a fresh baked mom right now. What do you think? What aspects are going to play an important role for your son in terms of this cultural belonging?
Hmm. So it's an excellent question. Which my answer probably changes daily. So we need to kind of follow up with more answers. um, so I think that first of all, it's something that I'm not sure how to answer, because sometimes I'm not sure I feel that I belong completely. And paraphrasing Ella Fitzgerald, she lived there and wrote, and I remember her saying that um, Paris is her hometown, and the world is her home, or something like that, which made me always feel that the moment you kind of lose, the moment you feel at home in a different place that is other than your homeland, you kind of lose your homeland in a sense. So I think that also with my biography of being born here and raised in the United States and later living and working in many other places, and always feeling at home very easily. It always surprises me that no matter where I am across the globe, yeah, my answer really changes. It changes according to the context of who is asking, when is it, how much do I want to delve in the answer. I remember during the time, again going back to that time in Paris, that I would meet like friends of friends in some bar 11:30 at night and someone says, "Oh, so where are you?" So I'd say from I was born in Israel, and it's a statement. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not just something that you can say and continue with the conversation you had before. It's something that really requires diving deep. And many times I really say that I'm just from the entire world, because I was born and raised across cultures. My partner is Argentinian, so I practically live my everyday life in three languages.
Mhm.
Um, and also he shares this kind of maybe like a migrating bird, that you have always this movement between countries and places, being from here and from there, and a little bit just from nowhere maybe. um, and I think that, yeah, the way in which also I'd like to educate maybe other generations and help other people figure out who they are, and add maybe more question marks to that, um, is, I think, again, kind of looking at which cultures or what places or which parts in you do you feel more strongly towards, interest you more, and to surface them with this question of where are you from. I remember that before even becoming a mother, so many times when I would write the components of my identity, I would write that I'm a professional, and that I'm a cross-culturalist, mediator, etc., and a woman. And now the question of, also adding a mother, right? So you become part of some wider human network. And what does that mean, right? What does that mean in your maybe personal work context? What does it mean in other parts of your life, in your identity? There are people maybe that hide their parenthood versus people that would be the first thing that they would put out. Um, yeah, so I think that about that I'm still figuring out, in what context do I put it up, as one of the first things, or do I keep for more of like a personal conversation,
Yeah.
and share that.
Yeah. So it's really
So
context based.
yeah, context based,
Mhm.
definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And context based, by the way, is also something that struck me also a lot when I listened to many people back then speaking just like you, several languages really fluently, and admitting that it was really wonderful on one hand side and pretty challenging on the other hand side to learn Hebrew,
Mm-hmm.
just because this was the language that was changing and evolving. And this is the moment when I relate to your guiding word change again so fast. So, yeah, historically, Hebrew was a language of the Bible, and at one point in the 20th century, there was this necessity to introduce words to describe the world around. So it had to happen really, really fast.
Mm-hmm.
When I think of this context in terms of, some re-narrating practices, when we dive into storytelling, it also gives us this, so to say, power tool to create words for something completely new so that we can name this phenomenon and we can really acknowledge that there is this huge change and there is something completely unexpected, so to say, never done before, never experienced before, and it's even crying, screaming for being named. So when I think of it, it guides me also to this idea that maybe it's the highest time to stop asking questions. Where are you from?
Mm, that's interesting. That's interesting. And I, again, kind of think of encounters I had, international and national, and how often, because I think at the end of the day, underneath the question of where are you from, there's maybe a very basic human need to sort, right? You meet someone new and you want to know in your mind on what shelf should you put them. There's some basic need for making, this encounter more, maybe easier even,
Yeah.
or more, um, tangible in the sense.
Mhm.
And I think that many times, I think that personally, as someone that different components of my identity never really aligned to people's expectations.
Mhm.
So again, many times I experienced very rude, direct questions being addressed, um, and of towards me, for instance, finishing a professional training and somebody asking, "Oh, and wait, how old are you?"
Mhm.
Which, just like the question of where are you from, maybe underneath that says, wait, but you seem maybe young, but you have a lot of experience in what you're doing, and maybe, you know, the standard of what you said is doesn't really comply to the like official education you have. I'm confused, so
Yeah.
how old are you?
Mm.
Same as where are you from, right? Trying to kind of label already externally, we're kind of, I'm recapping also what we were talking about, who that person is.
Yeah.
I have a very good friend of mine who, she's a Muslim, she's Palestinian, she's a polyglot. She knows 5 or 6 languages fluently. She is an intellect. She's many other things that I can say about her. And obviously, she told me once how, and she has an excellent accent in almost any language she speaks, and especially like speaking of the Arab Hebrew
Mhm.
or Palestinian Israeli context, when she speaks Hebrew, so it takes Hebrew speakers many times a while until they notice that she has a little accent.
Oh.
And then when they ask where is she from, or what is her mother tongue, and she says Arabic, so they're like, oh, whoa, whoa. And then suddenly, after they again kind of see who she is, so then they label her as like exotic because she's from here but not quite from here. And I think that it really is a question that the maybe it's worth, yeah, definitely I agree, perhaps it's about time we stop asking where are you from, because also if you're based somewhere, you could be your grandparents could be spread from all scattered across the globe, and your personal identity can be much richer and more complex than just the place you happen to be born in.
Mhm.
Or maybe you didn't happen to be, you weren't just born there by mere chance. Maybe there are other reasons to it, but obviously the way in which the person would tell it would always be different than that first impression.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Hmm. So, yes, the question is how we can re-narrate this question. What cultures are close to your heart? Or
hmm,
where do you feel home, so to say? Yeah.
right. um, yeah, well, for me it's a long list.
Yeah.
Just like I said, it changes. I think South American cultures, a lot of the indigenous kind of beauty of cultures that I met in the area of the Andes. So that includes like northern Argentina and parts of Bolivia and Peru. They have a very big place in my heart, um, alongside also with Middle Eastern cultures that I love, um, like Turkish cultures. I also have some ancestors from there, also Spanish cultures.
Mhm.
Also, I think the craziness even of the cultures of this very complex place that I live in right now, together with this, just like you said, not only the language evolves very, very fast, but it's a culture that just is in fast forward constantly. So sometimes it can be extremely tiring to just
Yeah.
be in this fast forward all the time. If you don't respond to an email within 2 hours, something is wrong with you. That's
Mm.
definitely how it's seen over here, um, especially amongst like startup companies or startup clients. But not only, you're really kind of requested to keep up with that pace.
Yeah.
Also, if you just finished your maternity leave, um, there's no time. It's another enemy, right? Like that I once researched also, and I use it a lot, the concept of time across cultures.
Yeah.
Maybe the most extreme that I've encountered is like in France, that time is a friend, right? It makes the wine better, the cheese better. um, you just wait for it to arrive so that you'll have another vacation. The sound of the violin and the cello become better with time, as opposed to here that it's an enemy. It's really perceived as an enemy. It's something to kill. It's
Mm.
something to beat. It's something to trick almost. Like how much can you do with the time that you know that is about to end? Um,
Does it actually vary from region to region? From, I don't know, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Jaffa
Yeah.
and Haifa.
Yeah, I like everything here that it's so intense and dense. Everything is so like close together, right? You can just drive half an hour and you change geography, you change the ethnic identity groups, the stories of the people, their beliefs, their customs. It definitely changes.
So, Ilyll, what is the final story, so to say, you would like to share regarding your dream for the future for better dealing with cultural differences and more inclusive spaces?
Perhaps using sensitivity. I think that sensitivity could make a big difference also in cross-cultural encounters. And I think I always go back to curiosity,
Yeah.
because curiosity, I really believe, is a motor that always, just like anything new you learn, you're on a learning curve. So if you want to become more globally fit or cross-culturally fit, so these are muscles and they'll ache and they'll hurt and sometimes you'll need to rest a bit. um, but I think that curiosity really is a drive, that also when you make mistakes and you kind of see the broader picture, that you're opening your heart, also for seeing better the other, for being seen in a better way, for listening actively, and also being heard. I think that these are, yeah, this is probably what I'd say. Yeah, and some desire, right? Because when you
Mhm.
really want something, when you're really curious, when you really do something that you're completely present in, so everyone feels it, even through Zoom.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely, definitely. It's, you know, this beautiful saying, it's better to be present than to be perfect.
yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very, very much for being present, for sharing so many stories, especially stories on change. Also, you know, not only in the professional context, but also your biggest change, becoming a mom in this tricky year, 2020. I wish you and your family all the best for the
Thank you.
upcoming time. And of course, lots of curious, sensitive, and best wishing people around.
Thank you very much, Joanna, and thanks also for initiating this beautiful series of talks.